Hello and welcome everybody to According to Andrew number 87, The Benefits of Nobility, hashtag Bring Back the Nobility. So this is probably going to be a controversial opinion. I don't know, I guess, uh, what my audience thinks about this whole thing or what the general populace does, but I remember talking to somebody about this at Freedom Fest. There's just a random guy that I sat down with, and we were kind of chatting about like what are your political views, blah blah blah. And this is one of the things I brought up. I was like, I think we should bring back the nobility. He's like, that is a bit out there. So I wanted to kind of explain myself as to why I think this. Vox has talked about Vox Day has talked about the benefits of this a little bit on his podcast. I don't think he's given a full. He's like, I think it would be beneficial, but I don't know if he's given like a full, XYZ reason. Where he's done like some where he's done breakdowns of certain concepts of things in very intricate detail. This wasn't one of the things that was kind of dedicated a stream to, but it is something that he shares an opinion with Machiavellian, and I remember him bringing it up when he was talking about Machiavelli's Discourses, which is going to be a leather-bound book. Super excited about. But I also have a copy of it myself currently somewhere in my my apartment house. So, and his argument is that the best structure is to have a set designated noble class, and the reason for this is that the nobility are the ones that basically created the structure and created the institutions and stuff that run the society, and it is in their best interest to make sure that that society continues to function and continues to run well. And this is something I agree with. And one of the reasons that you get a breakdown of these kind of things and you get this generation of politics into total politics and stuff like that is because you let foreigners start to run your country. They have no interest in maintaining any institutions. In fact, the breakdown of those institutions and becoming counter elites is something that generates more political power for them and potentially allows them, when the society collapses, to be the ones that build up the new institutional networks and therefore be the top dogs again. And I want to talk about what some of those systems could end up looking like. And it's hard to say exactly what that would look like and how it would last long term. But I have a general framework that I don't know if it's dynamic enough. I don't know if it is, but we'll get into it. So, these structures are what Machiavelli kind of talked about in the vein of Sparta and Rome. Basically, you have an elite patrician class who's responsible for maintenance of society, and they also, so they get into some trouble. So a lot of times the elites, like if you look at America, a lot of the elites right now are merchant class, are top business owners, people like Bezos and Bill Gates and stuff like that, and they benefit from even the lower down people who are just like running businesses. They benefit from increased immigration so that they can get lower. So it puts downward pressure on wages. Downward pressure on wages means they have to pay less for labor, and they get a higher yield, a higher dollar from their own thing. That doesn't necessarily care about if all they care about is making that money. They don't necessarily care about the overall structure and lasting thing of society. And maybe that's something I'll talk about later, is the kind of different groups and which one is the best patron of maintaining a society and maintaining a nation, because the merchant class so far has not shown itself to be very good at maintaining the coherency of the nation. But I haven't really looked at the other ones. Nobility seems like it would be a good one, just because they have an inherent interest in maintaining kind of their current stock and in life, and adding more people is gonna, like, yeah, sure, you can add a bunch more people, but a certain percentage of those are going to rise to kind of your elite status, and then therefore they're going to put more pressure and more problems on the elites themselves and cause a whole bunch of issues. So they probably aren't interested in immigration for immigration's sake. Well, not for immigration's sake, but to get cheaper labor. And on top of that, like, if you look at the more serf style, like, yeah, you can bring in more serfs and they can work your land or whatever. But if you have a set amount of land, like bringing in more serfs, how much does that yield more out of the land? It's a little different in an industrial society where you bring another person in and it makes it so you have to pay everybody else. over time it equates to you have to pay everyone else less to get the same amount of production out, and also potentially bringing that person on also increases your production. That isn't necessarily true with nobility and stuff like that. There might be some instances where they have 20 serfs or something like that, and but they have enough land to be worked by 40, and then they maybe want to bring some people on, but that potentially would be covered by kids being born and serfs moving from one area to another. I'm not super up on how serf contracts worked and how serfs could be transferred between nobles, if that was even an option. But because a lot of times they're tied to the exact land that they were working. But it didn't seem to really be an issue based on the Secular Cycles book that I read, because it was more they had enough land to work and cultivate and to feed themselves, and then over time as populations grew, that land shrunk. Anyway, bit of a side tangent, but it relates. So continuing on with why you want this privileged candidate class in power, and their specific ambitions and stuff like that align with keeping your society coherent. Not exactly that, but basically, I would like to see it structured in the Roman system, where there's two issues with these. So you can have it where they get paid or they don't get paid. And I would like to where they don't get paid. Now, you can argue that there's a lot of corruption and stuff like that, and they're going to have backhand deals and do things that are going to personally benefit them to gain more money. And one, even with the amount that they're paid right now in the United States, they do that anyway. So there's one. Two, if you have this clear delineation, generally there was different laws and different rules for the nobility. Now that, on the face of it, sucks. You don't want rules for the but not for me kind of stuff. But here's the thing. If they're going to do it anyway, it's probably better to just have it written down. And then they can't just kind of whimsically, like, at least it's clear, okay, yes, you have these certain privileges, but because you have these privileges, you also have these responsibilities. With those responsibilities comes all the X, Y, and Z expectations and stuff like that. It'll be easier to hold them accountable for bad actions and stuff like that. And I could be wrong on that. But it seems our current system isn't working, so I'm willing to, roll the dice and see what happens. So with that, I also like the idea of the privileged class trading their money for power in the political positions, and they do not come being paid, but the privileges afforded them in society should make this a non-issue. There's also a clear delineation between the elites and non-elites, making it clear who is responsible for what to make society dynamic enough to face an ever-changing series of obstacles, especially in an industrial society where, for thousands of years we're agrarian, and now we're industrial, and it is still pretty new. We're still figuring out kind of some of the dynamics, and there might be pretty regular dynamics like are laid out in secular cycles, but we're still figuring a lot of that out. I mean, we just kind of figured out the agrarian cycle thing. We're past that stage. And then, anyway, you need to be dynamic to an extent, and allow the elites to kind of come in and out. And so but you want the fluidity of elites, but you also don't want to water down your founding people, because those founding people are important, and their ranks can expand by bringing in and marrying like outside their ranks, and that's how you can kind of bring them in. Is you can have your because obviously you don't want to go Habsburgs, right? You don't want to be marrying like cousins and stuff like that and get serious genetic deformities and stuff like that. So you want the pool from which they can select potential partners from to be large enough that that's not going to happen, but also small enough that it isn't going to create too much crazy inter-elite competition. And I have an idea later on that I'll discuss which would cause crazy inter-elite competition, but I think it'd be interesting regardless. And could be kind of, well, I don't know if it'd be fun, because usually inter-elite conflict means civil war and a lot of bloodshed and stuff, but it's an interesting idea at the very least. So the way I had this broken down in my mind was 4 different classes. So to keep you would basically have a delineation between noble families, who are basically the founders, the ones who built the original society, and therefore it is their job to maintain the society. And then you have your commoners. Then these two groups are divided basically into an upper and lower house. So you have your nobility, and you have your elite nobility, and you have your um, commoner nobility, everyday nobility that isn't uh, up to the caliber and up to the scale that they need to be. And then you have on the other side, in your commoner group, you have your elite commoners, and then you have your commoners, your plebeians type groups. So those are kind of the four groups. And I think this would uh, work well, and you would limit which power, like you could limit what power sectors each one would have. So I would say the plebeians don't get any power. That might sound harsh, but that generally has worked throughout society. Is uh, as we've seen with voting and things like that, like not everybody cares or wants. They just want a stable, semi-functional society in which they can go about their daily thing. They don't care about politics. They don't care about any of that stuff. They don't want to get involved with it. They just want to make sure that the taxes aren't overbearing and that laws are somewhat fair. So to represent them, you would have, and maybe this isn't a good idea because a lot of times these groups kind of end up in their own little bubbles, but you would have your successful, rich kind of commoner class, and they would represent basically the plebeian class. And this is kind of how it works already in the United States, and I'll show you as a comparison once I kind of go through all these groups. So once you reach a certain level of status, then you can become this. Okay. So here's the four names. So on the nobility side, the top level group, the elite nobility, are the patriarchs. The lower tier nobility are the patricians. The elite commoners are the patrons, and the commoner class is the commoners or the plebeians. So those are the four names I just put there for placeholder. But that way you'll know what I'm talking about as I'm going through these. So the plebeians or the commoners are the backbone of society, but ultimately have limited or no political power. The patricians, who are the elite families, would be elite families that have fallen on hard times, and while they still have a legacy, are regulated to more minor roles until they can regain their previous glory. So they mismanaged their finances. They did things that were not becoming of a noble family, and therefore they were their higher level status, their ability to gain upper level elite status was quenched. But there's a path back, and I think that will help with some of the relief of elite overproduction and stuff like that. And I'll get into it and address elite overproduction a little bit later. The patrons are the group of well-to-do commoners that are not a part of the original founding, but are nonetheless of elite quality. Patrons would be responsible for some institutions like the tribune from Rome, as an example, and some other primary, and their primary job is to represent the plebeians. Another institution that would probably fit their role pretty well would be like a House of Commons or a what is it, the House of Representatives in the United States. Both those fit that group pretty well. Last you have, or wait, patrons, yeah. Last you have the patriarchs, who are the elite of the elite, or elite of the nobles, and these are the top-ranked noble families that occupy the top positions within government. Using the U.S., so I'll use the USA as an example quick. Now, using the USA system as an example, it would probably be best for the patricians to occupy, or the patriarchs, my bad, the elite of the elite, to occupy the federal aspects of the government, your president, your Supreme Court, your Senate, while the patricians occupy more state levels, your governors, your circuit judges, your state senators. The patrons would be allowed to occupy the very local, like your city boards, your local judicial courts, municipal courts, and municipal systems. The highest position that they would be able to achieve is, like I said, the House of Commons or House of Representatives in the United States. And then the plebeians are not allowed to go into political life. And this basically exists in reality right now, but it's not like there's no hardline rules as to like what group can go into this, and there is some flow between these different groups. It doesn't. There's a lot of social constructs. I know people use that word in the wrong, but like there's a lot of um, social and economic and a lot of varying reasons why one group or another isn't really allowed into the other one. But if a commoner is very successful, like a Donald Trump, they can shoot all the way to the presidency. It there there was a lot of reasons why that caused issues with the current ruling class, as it were. But these kind of things can uh, adjust. So to kind of give you my official written statement on this, uh, this in reality is probably how the elites are portioned out in American society already. It just doesn't have that clear delineation, and there's no strict laws that prevent plebeians from rising the ranks and getting all the way to the top spot. It's just very, very unlikely. Even though there are many customs and other social economic ways to block this path for most people without having to outright say it's law, which is kind of a sneaky way of doing it. um, so I think it would also be very useful to formalize how you go from one group to another. Now, this might be way too rigid for how society changes and stuff like that, but it at least gives like it. It's kind of, I don't know. I guess I look at the world in the sense of like a game. Like, just tell me what the rules are, and then I'll figure out how to play. And then it'll be those people that are like the spiffing Brit and stuff who just try to figure out how to break the game and ruin everybody's fun. Not ruin everybody's fun, but that's their thing. So they'll probably break the system the immediate second I put something in place, or anybody does. But it's an interesting idea. So it'd be nice to have a formalized way to move into and out of these various groups. So if you're a commoner, you need to make $100,000 a year, and then you're no longer a commoner, you're in this other class. If you're a nobility, you need to do things that are seen as of noble status. I don't know, spending so much money on wine and entertaining certain guests and having enough money to do so, or some crap like that. I don't know. But there would be some kind of system. Now, this is probably too rigid for the dynamic world that we live in, especially considering that industrialization is fairly new and we're still trying to figure out exactly how to structure society. But this is effectively how things were formalized in the agrarian society with landed nobility. But the Industrial Revolution kind of flipped that whole system on its head. You had your barons, you had your lords, you had your knights. There was a way to get from one to, you worked as a squire, then you became a knight. Knights, if they served faithfully or whatever, could be granted land. Then you became a noble. Like there was some, it wasn't super clear, but there was at least some understanding of the path and how you get there and what you kind of had to do. And for the general person, it was never going to happen. And you want to know what? Most people were fine with that. So let's see here. I turned to system. I think it'd be interesting if a new system like the noble one that was built to a new noble system was built, but for industrial societies. The aspect of it in our society, there are aspects of it in our society, but isn't delineated. Like I had talked about with the barons and such. This is probably overstating the case of the medieval era, as it was very unclear who the barons were loyal to and stuff like that. There was a lot of going back and forth and changing alliances and owning a certain amount of land, and it became kind of like who owned what land became very kind of confusing. So it, maybe our current society does reflect that society more than I am giving it credit for. But I think once it became more formalized, once you had the central monarchs kind of really take over and become the main thing, kind of subsume the noble families, they were able to take a lot of that structure, kind of formalize it, bring it into their power structure, and then it was kind of like a clear thing. And a lot of it was just giving people favors for basically being friends and loyal to the crown. But quite frankly, that is a currency. Loyalty is a currency. And when you're somebody that's wielding that much power and stuff like that, yeah, you don't want somebody. You want someone who's loyal and not incompetent. But if you have competent but untrustworthy, like that's gonna be a knife in the back, man. That's a dangerous game to be playing. So it's it makes sense why loyalty is rewarded. Let's put it that way. um, so a couple last side things. That's kind of like the coherent aspect of it, but there's a couple of side things that I wanted to talk about uh, that are in the same vein. So I thought it would be kind of interesting. So I was talking about elite overproduction earlier and how that's going to be an issue if this gets implemented. But I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if I didn't have to live through it, what would happen. So to go towards that thing of like saying, okay, there's clear delineations, and when you hit a certain level of success, you move up to the next tier. And I had those four groups, but like let's say your commoner group, you could go from commoner as it works now and all the way to the top, but you had to kind of go through each stage. So you were a commoner, then you became a elite commoner, then you became a lower level noble, and then upper level noble. Because I can't remember the names I gave for these. That was a terrible idea. I don't know why I did that. Uh, so I think it would be interesting if you served in the House for 6 terms, which would be 12 years, that you are now considered part of the elite in America and therefore can no longer represent the common folk because you've lost touch. You're like, there's certain aspects where it makes sense. Like you shouldn't be able to represent these people because you don't know what it's like to be a normal person anymore. Therefore, you cannot hold office, and either in that you cannot hold office as a commoner, which would be your House of Representatives area, and you need to seek a spot as the Senate in the Senate or the executive branch. This, there is no way this would not cause elite overproduction, but in the current state of things, maybe this is a good thing. Which I think we might be in a state of elite overproduction right now. Actually, we definitely are. Um, but yeah, so the current frictions within the United States would only get worse if this happened, because now you have there's like 500 something representatives, and after 12 years, those 500 representatives, like let's just say we started it now, they all decided to serve their 6 terms. Now you have 500 something senators or representatives that are now going to be competing for the 100 Senate positions and various executive positions. Like there's not enough space for all these people, and and then in 12 more years you're going to have that same issue. um, it would be a very unstabilizing system, but maybe it'd be a good premise for a book. Who knows? um, easier to do. Um, talk about the smoke screen. Oh, that's not what we want. Okay, so last little thing. So I think if you take the structural dynamic theory or secular cycles of Turchin and you combine it with a Machiavellian realpolitik mentality, you could create a very formidable political leader. And this is kind of what we wanted out of Trump. Um, but quite frankly, the people that are actually doing it are the current ruling elite to a degree, and I'll explain. Uh, Actually, it almost seems like the ruling elite is somewhat aware of this fact, as the way that they have behaved, um, the way they are behaving, is to act as a united elite, and put down populism, which is a counter-elite movement that threatens to collapse their power structure. Looking at the disintegrative phase before the Civil War, because I was just reading the secular cycles. I'll probably touch on this when I do the book review. It's probably coming up soon. Um, Age of Discord actually is what I'm reading. So you have an integrative phase, then a disintegrative phase, then a crisis. So the disintegration phase basically happened right before the Civil War because Civil War, pretty major crisis. Um, so with that, uh, you had this counter elite movement basically start up. So looking at this disintegrative phase before the Civil War, and you have many parties coming up and lots of fractions of elite. So you had the Republican Party came up. There was like a Silver Party. There was like 50 or 60 parties. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head. But you don't see that in the United States anymore, which is kind of interesting. Um, and let's see here. But then in today, when you see attempts made like this with the Tea Party or Trumpian populism, you either see subsume that movement is either subsumed in the Tea Party case or it is put down harshly with the Trump case. And thank you, Emsworth, for the one lemon. Let's see. I was just thinking, that the rules for this would be a good board game or card game. That could be fun. Make it. I'd probably play it. Um, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. I was pretty focused. Um, but yeah, so that kind of covers that whole thing, and that's what I wanted to talk about. So thank you guys, everybody, for listening. Emsworth, you got any last thoughts? Any last things you wanted to ask? But as you guys, as he's maybe typing or whatever, I'm BitChute. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Podbean. So look for me there. I said I was gonna get 3 out a week, and I'm at 2. It's an improvement. All right, I'm not great at doing this full time. So anyway, those are where I'm at. So find me there. Thank you guys for listening, and have yourselves a good day.